us today. My name is Ian Scott, and I'm the managing partner at Scott Legal. And today we're going to spend some time going over the National Interest Waiver petition. It's called NIW in short, and the category that this particular green card falls under is the EB2 category. But before we get into the details, just a couple of housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, so we will post it to our YouTube channel where there are other videos and webinars that we regularly post, usually as many as 2 a week at times. So you should hit the subscribe button and you will be notified when new videos come up. We will also send you a copy of the recording as well as a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. We'll also send you some information if you do want to set up a consultation. And the final thing we'll send you is a National Interest Waiver guide. So a document that really goes over many of the things that we'll talk about in the presentation today. If you do have questions, you can add them to either the chat box or the Q&A box. We will get to all questions. So don't worry about that. We have plenty of time to go through the material. So let's talk first about something that often comes up when we're looking at national interest waiver petitions, and we get a lot of people who contact us and they say, hey, I saw that if you have an advanced degree or if you have this thing called exceptional ability, that you can get national interest waiver, you can get a green card. And they say, well, I have a master's degree or I have a doctorate, and so can I get the national interest waiver? And the answer to that is no. So before you even look at a national interest waiver petition and whether or not you're eligible, you have to realize that they fall under a category. In terms of employment-based green cards, they run from EB1 through EB5. So EB1, EB2, EB3, EB4, and EB5. Now, the national interest waiver falls under EB2. Now, what also falls under EB2 is if a company wants to sponsor a professional. That also falls under EB2. Now, the threshold requirements that are required for EB2 apply to both national interest waiver and if a company is sponsoring you for a green card under EB2. And so think of it as not even a minimum standard, and think of it as before you even get to the hard part of the national interest waiver, you are required to meet the threshold requirements. So the threshold requirements are, and it's either or. So once you've met one of these things, then you can move to the next level. Then you can move to the criteria, the national interest waiver criteria. You only have to meet one of them. So the first one is an advanced degree. So if you have an advanced degree, so that's a master's degree or higher, then you can move to step 2, right? So that one is maybe the easiest one in terms of moving on so that you can assess whether you're eligible for a national interest waiver. So as I was saying, the kind of first and foremost, what you're kind of required to do is prove these threshold requirements. And if you do prove that you are you have an advanced degree, then that you can stop right there, master's or higher. So then the second way that you can prove this is if you prove that you have a bachelor's degree plus 5 years of experience. They call it progressive experience, but really that you're taking on an increasing number, increasing amount of responsibility as time passes. So that's kind of the second way that you could do a bachelor's plus 5. And then if you don't meet any of these, then you can still meet the, kind of move to point 2 by having what's called exceptional ability. Now, with exceptional ability, what that really means is that there are 7 criteria that are listed on this slide, and you have to meet 3 of them. So now this is not to be confused with extraordinary ability, which is EB1 category, but exceptional ability, if you don't, so for example, let's say someone had a high school degree, but they could meet 3 of these other criteria, like maybe membership in a particular field, they had 10 years of work experience, maybe they had, a diploma in addition to the high school degree, then they still may be able to qualify under EB2. But generally speaking, if you can qualify under the advanced degree, that's fantastic. But if not, you might have to qualify. And so when you're looking at, and as I said, we get a lot of calls where people say, hey, can we qualify for this? and or I believe I qualify just because I have an advanced degree, or just because I meet 3 of these exceptional ability criteria. And unfortunately, that's not the case, because once you've met this threshold requirement, then you have to go to the 3-prong test to see, which is, I'll call it the hard part. You have to go to the 3-prong test to see if you meet the national interest waiver requirement. And that 3-prong test is that you prove that the proposed endeavor has both substantial merit and national importance. You have to show that you're well positioned to advance the proposed endeavor, and you have to show that you are on balance. It would be beneficial to the United States to waive the requirement. So we're going to talk about these 3 requirements in much more detail. So that's not something that I ran through them very quickly, but we're going to talk about them in much more detail. So the other thing to kind of keep in mind before we kind of get into the details of the 3 prongs is it is possible to use this category for entrepreneurs, and we have done that before. And where you file a case where you might say that, okay, the substantial benefit or national importance, what we call prong 1, could be that you're creating U.S. jobs, and in particular, if you're creating those U.S. jobs in an area where the workers, where there's economic depression, that's that's going to be something that is going to be really beneficial. And the reason it's beneficial is because the case that governs this stuff actually said this. It's a case called Danisar, and that's the case that sets out the standards for it. The other kind of thing to keep in mind with entrepreneurs when we look at the 3rd prong is that the 3rd prong kind of says, we'll go back to it, it says that there must be showing on balance that would be beneficial to the United States to waive the requirement that there's a job offer. Because the government has already said that they believe that it is in the national interest to protect U.S. jobs. So, but the thing is, when you're doing an entrepreneur, this particular prong really isn't applicable. And we can say this in our response to the government that this particular prong is really not applicable, because the person who owns the company, if it's an entrepreneur, they can't sponsor themselves for a green card. So it's a couple of considerations with entrepreneurs that are important. So now let's talk a little bit more about the 3 criteria and kind of what they're talking about. So the first one, what we said is the person is coming to the United States to engage in activities that have substantial merit and are of national importance. Now, the very first thing that we do whenever we do a national interest waiver petition is we start out with an endeavor. So we start out with an endeavor which basically says that this is what the person is coming to the United States to do. Right, that's the very first thing that we do when we are when we are starting a national interest waiver petition. Everything falls behind that. So when you're setting up a consultation to go over whether you think you're eligible for national interest waiver, and one of the first things that you should do is really ask yourself, what is it I'm coming to the United States to do? Is it that I'm going to work for a particular employer? Am I coming here to provide consulting services on cybersecurity? Am I coming here to invent something, or to do research? Like, exactly what, and the more specific that you can be, the better. And then the question is does that particular endeavor have substantial merit? And is it nationally important? And a substantial merit, that particular piece in the standard, it's pretty easy. When there were cases that came to the government for teachers, for example, the government said, yes, the role that the teacher is performing does have substantial merit, but where it fell down for them, unfortunately, was that the government says that the national importance wasn't there. And because national importance is getting at that it's beneficial to the nation as a whole. So a teacher that is teaching classes and teaching students over a period of time, it's obviously beneficial, but the standard is looking for something much grander than that. So let's say that a teacher, for example, came up with a novel new teaching methodology that she was rolling out to various schools across the country, then perhaps that could qualify for national interest waiver. But an individual teacher that was teaching in a school or university level, that would be difficult to qualify for a national interest waiver. So the national importance part is the grandness of it, is how big is it. And the second piece has to do with whether or not the person is well positioned to advance the endeavor. And if we just go back up to you look at these 3 at the bottom here, the person is well positioned to advance the endeavor. Now there we're going to be looking at the person's experience. We're going to be looking at their resume, their degrees, but more important than that, we're going to be looking, we're going to be looking at the endeavor that the person's carved out and whether they're actually going to be able to achieve that. And the government, one thing they really love is track record, right? So if you've done the same thing in your country before, if you say that you're going to come to the United States to kind of roll out green technology or green something to do with the environment, et cetera, then they want to see, well, have you done that in your own country and you've done it successfully? Other things that kind of point that you have maybe made progress or could make progress towards the National Interest Waiver. It could be that you have a patent that gives you the particular ability to do something. If it's business or entrepreneur, it could be that your company is well capitalized. It could be that you're accepted into a particular type of incubator or something like that. If you're a tech startup or something, but something that's really showing that you are going to be able to accomplish what it is that you said. You often will have a business plan especially if it's something to do with entrepreneurs. But really, you're going to have to show that the government wants more than just your word for it, because they are giving you a green card, so they want more than just your word for it. Then the final criteria, and often what happens is this particular second criteria is often the most difficult one. So then the final criteria is that you must be on balance, that it's beneficial that the labor certification is waived, that it's beneficial, because the government's already said that they believe that it's in the national interest to protect U.S. jobs. So here we use a lot of the same arguments that we have for 1 and 2, but we also throw in anything else that is, the applicant has, like have they published articles, have they do newspapers write about them, what accomplishments have they had in their lifetime, and sometimes even where did they go to school, different things like that. We indicate with respect to why the government should waive the labor certification. But I think that the two, the most important ones are prong 1 and prong 2. So let's talk about kind of how they're filed and some of the timing considerations for this. So in order to file a National Interest Waiver petition, we're going to file an I-140 petition. The I-140 petition is going to be what goes over, like, have you met A, the threshold requirements, and then B, have you met the requirements with respect to have you met the requirements with respect to the actual NIW petition. So then with that, you're going to, to include all of the supporting documentation with the I-140, and then you can actually pay the government $2,800 and adjudicate the petition in 45 days. However, the answer you're going to get is either an approval or an RFE, which is a request for additional evidence, or a NOID, which is notice of intent to deny. Normally, it would just be an RFE. It's something, if the government doesn't feel you've quite made your case, they would be quite specific and say, okay, well, here's a request for evidence, and give us, this particular information, and we'll assess it, and then we'll decide one way or another whether we're going to issue the petition. The thing you also have to keep in mind is that the petitions, even though you can get the I-140 approved in 45 days, the category, the green card category, may not actually be current. So that's something you have to consider. And what that means is that the government can only issue a certain number of green cards in each category each year. And once that happens, then the green card categories become backlogged. And once they become backlogged, then unfortunately, it's not possible to issue any more green cards until that, until the person finds their place in line. So right now, the EB2 category is backlogged, but they're backlogged by about 1.5 years. So they can't issue green cards under this category for at least 1.5 years. And it could be that backlog gets more delayed. So that's something you have to keep in mind. And when that happens, then you have to make sure that you have some other visa status that you're able to rely on, right? So some other visa status, so it could be TN, it could be E1, E2, but you also have to keep in mind that if you are doing something like TN or E1, E2, that those are not dual intent visas, right? So you want to make sure that you have enough time so that you're not going back to the government and asking them for renewal of these, that you have some underlying ability. And then once the category becomes current, then you can actually file the I-485 petition and request travel authorization and work authorization. One of the reasons sometimes people don't file the I-485 has to do with the fact that you can't travel, right? So until you get the travel authorization. So sometimes people are not in a position where they can just stay in the United States for 9 months waiting on the travel authorization. A few things to keep in mind is that STEM-related fields, the government has, kind of indicated that these are important. So anytime we can kind of link to STEM-related fields or link the endeavor to STEM-related activities, that's going to be really beneficial to us. So that's something that, and I think we talked a little bit about entrepreneurs, but if you have, if you have investors. That's great for entrepreneurs if you have money from venture capital funds, if you're accepted into incubators, all of that can be useful. And then also if you already have a business, then and you're arguing that part of the economic benefit is hiring employees, then it would be beneficial to include information related to your business, like the tax returns, et cetera. So I think that's and we went over a number of the points in this well-positioned in terms of things that can support being well positioned. So I think we won't go over that again. So what do you include? So the information really relates to all of the different things that we talked about. We're going to include, if you're doing bachelor's advanced degree, you're going to include a copy of the degree showing that you have a master's degree or higher. If you're doing bachelor's plus 5 years of work experience, you have to include the degree, but then also you have to include experience letters that show that you have that work experience. And then if you are doing the 3 of 7 exceptional ability, then of course you have to include information that shows that you have met those particular criteria. And then for national interest, sometimes you're going to have expert opinion letters. It could be to show that the national importance, rather, you're going to show the expert opinion letters. You could have news articles where the government's saying that they believe this particular thing is very important. You could have academic papers, research papers, et cetera, describing that. It could be that, there are going to be business plans, a business plan, especially for entrepreneurs, that show, explain, your endeavor in more detail, but also explain why it is that you are going to be able to meet it. Because if the business plan is credible, then it might be, that might be very helpful. Expert opinion letters are very important for national interest waiver petitions. I think when you're doing them, you have to look at what the letter relates to, right? So if you first have to say, okay, well, what is it I'm trying to prove? Am I trying to prove that this particular thing is of national importance? And then if I am, then you're going to get a letter maybe that supports that. Or am I trying to prove that this person is well positioned to advance the endeavor? Then I'm going to get a letter to support that. But they're very, very important to national interest waiver petitions. I always like to include this example of it's an approved case, and what's the reason it's an interesting example, because it wasn't always approved. It was a case that was submitted and was initially denied, and then the person appealed, and the appeals board looked at it, and they came back and said, yeah, this person's eligible. And it was an individual who had a small consulting company, and now the case keeps on saying small consulting company, which is interesting. So it doesn't have to be a big, grand consulting company. And the person was providing the consulting with respect to providing improved services for U.S. veterans. And the government said that the applicant, the appeals board rather, said that the applicant submitted expert letters, articles, reports. It said that, they talked about the difficulties about vets that were returning to the United States. And how these types of services are really important, and the U.S. government has said that they're really important. So they said that it was, substantial merit and national importance. And then this particular person had worked with governments and in similar roles in the past to kind of bring stakeholders together to be able to provide these types of services. So had a track record of doing this in the past, and then this person was self-employed. So we looked at the whole thing with respect to when you're self-employed, you're not going to have to kind of spend much time arguing that the third prong even applies. And so the government overturned the USCIS decision and said that this particular case was an actual valid case. So that's something to keep in mind. So that is all the covered material that we have. Definitely, if I don't see any questions that have come in, still some time to add some if you do have some. But in terms of As I said, there'll be, we'll send out a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. We'll send out a copy of the webinar, the actual webinar. We'll also send out a guide, the National Interest Waiver guide, and a consult link. So if you do have additional questions and want to set up a consultation to go through your particular scenario, we'd be happy to do that. I'm just taking a last look, and I still don't see any questions. So we'll end it there. Thank you very much again. Take care.